What if the single most important meeting of your life, a meeting worth $9 billion, was on the other side of the Atlantic? You have your first-class ticket, your passport, and the weight of your entire company on your shoulders. The jet bridge is open, the engines are humming. But one man, the pilot, looks you in the eye and says, "Not on my aircraft." This isn't a story about a missed flight. It's the story of how a single act of prejudice in an airport terminal sent a multi-billion-dollar corporation into a nosedive, and how the man responsible learned that karma doesn't fly commercial. It hits with the force of a private jet. Julian Vance adjusted the knot of his Brioni tie, the silk a cool, reassuring weight against his skin. He wasn't a man given to extravagance, but for a meeting of this magnitude, every detail was a signal, a piece of armor. From his vantage point in the exclusive Orion Club lounge at JFK's Terminal 4, the tarmac shimmered in the late afternoon sun. Below, the sleek silver bird of Stellara Air Flight 114 to Zurich was being prepped for its transatlantic journey. His journey. At 38, Julian was the founder and CEO of Auracin, a company that had gone from a Silicon Valley startup in a cramped garage to a titan of AI-driven logistics in less than a decade. Auracin wasn't just successful, it was revolutionary. Its predictive algorithms managed shipping routes, optimized supply chains, and redirected global freight with an efficiency that made titans like FedEx and UPS look archaic. And now, the final prize was within his grasp. A merger with the German industrial behemoth, Kronos Dynamics. The deal wasn't just a merger, it was a coronation. It was valued at an eye-watering $9 billion, a figure that would make Auracin a global powerhouse overnight and cement Julian's legacy. The final signatures were to be laid on paper tomorrow morning in Zurich. The Kronos CEO, the notoriously precise and deeply traditional Klaus Richter, had insisted on an in-person meeting. No video calls, no proxies. He wanted to shake the hand of the man whose vision he was buying into. Punctuality and presence, Richter had said, were the bedrock of trust. Julian's phone buzzed. It was Arthur Kensington, his mentor and the chairman of Auracin's board, already in Zurich. "Everything looks good on this end, Julian." Arthur's voice was a familiar, calming baritone. "The champagne is on ice, and the Germans are, well, they're German, eager and efficient. Just get yourself here." "Wheels up in 90 minutes, Arthur. I'm looking at the plane right now," Julian replied, a rare smile touching his lips. He felt a surge of pride. He, a boy who grew up in Inglewood, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs, was about to command a global empire. He had fought for every scrap of respect, outmaneuvering, outworking and outthinking everyone. He'd faced skepticism and veiled prejudice his entire career, but his results were undeniable. Numbers, after all, are colorblind. A crisp, disembodied voice announced the pre-boarding for Stellara Air Flight 114 for first-class passengers. Julian took a final sip of his sparkling water, slid his laptop into its leather case, and stood up. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed in a custom Tom Ford suit, his demeanor radiating a quiet, unshakable confidence. He nodded to the lounge attendant, who smiled warmly. "Have a wonderful flight, Mr. Vance." Walking down the sterile white corridor towards the gate, he felt the familiar pre-flight thrum of anticipation. This wasn't just another business trip. This was the culmination of his life's work. As he approached the gate, he noticed the flight crew gathered near the jet bridge entrance. Among them was a man in his late 50s with a stern, weathered face, silvering hair cut in a severe military style, and 4 golden stripes on his epaulets. Captain Robert Morrison. He was laughing with a flight attendant, a loud, barking sound that seemed to command the space around him. Julian paid him no mind, focusing only on the door that led to his seat, 1A, and beyond that, to Zurich. He handed his boarding pass and passport to the gate agent. The agent, a young woman named Sarah, scanned it with a professional smile. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Vance. Right this way." As Julian stepped forward, a hand shot out, blocking his path. It was Captain Morrison. The laughter had vanished from his face, replaced by a cold, appraising stare. His eyes swept over Julian, from his expensive suit to his polished shoes, and a slight, almost imperceptible sneer tightened his lips. "Hold on a minute," the captain said, his voice a low rumble of authority. "Let me see that." He took the boarding pass from the gate agent's hand, his gaze flicking from the paper to Julian's face, and back again. The air grew thick with a sudden, unspoken tension. Julian kept his expression neutral, though a warning bell, honed by years of navigating similar encounters, began to chime softly in the back of his mind. "Is there a problem, Captain?" Julian asked, his voice even and calm. Captain Morrison held the pass up, angling it as if inspecting a counterfeit bill. "Vance," he said, drawing the name out slowly. "First class. Seat 1A, all the way to Zurich." He looked up, his pale blue eyes hard as stone. "I just have a few questions I need to ask before I can let you board my aircraft." The gate area, once a place of quiet, orderly movement, fell into a strange, focused silence. The other first-class passengers, a mix of silver-haired European businessmen and well-dressed couples, paused, their attention drawn to the silent drama unfolding at the mouth of the jet bridge. Julian maintained his composure, a mask of professional calm he had perfected over years of being the only black man in a boardroom. "Of course, Captain. What can I help you with?" Captain Morrison didn't look at Julian's face. Instead, he continued to scrutinize the boarding pass. "This ticket was booked last minute," he stated, not as a question, but as an accusation. "It was," Julian confirmed. "There was a late change in my schedule. My assistant can confirm the purchase with corporate." "I'm sure she can," Morrison drawled, his tone dripping with sarcasm. He tapped the passport against his knuckles. "And this passport? Julian Vance. You don't look like a Julian." A cold knot tightened in Julian's stomach. The pretense of a routine security check had just evaporated, revealing the ugly prejudice beneath. He had heard variations of this his whole life, comments on his name, his speech, his clothes. It was the language of disbelief, the suggestion that his success was an anomaly, an error in the system. "I can assure you, I am Julian Vance," he said, his voice dropping a decibel, losing its warmth and gaining a core of steel. "And that is my passport. Is there a specific security concern you have, Captain?" He was challenging him, calling the bluff. He was forcing Morrison to either state his prejudice aloud or back down. The captain, however, was a man unaccustomed to being challenged. His authority on his aircraft was absolute, a fact he clearly cherished. "The concern," Morrison said, finally meeting Julian's eyes, "is my right to ensure the safety and security of my flight. I have final say on who boards and who doesn't. And right now, something about this doesn't feel right to me. You seem agitated." "I seem agitated because my boarding is being inexplicably delayed," Julian countered, his patience fraying. "I have a $9 billion corporate merger to finalize in the morning, so with all due respect, I would appreciate it if you could conclude your assessment." The mention of $9 billion had the opposite effect Julian intended. Morrison's eyes narrowed, a flicker of resentful disbelief in them. To him, this wasn't the credential of a powerful CEO. It was the outlandish boast of a fraud. The gate agent, Sarah, stepped forward nervously. "Captain Morrison, sir, Mr. Vance is one of our premium platinum flyers. His credentials are all in order. I've verified them myself." Morrison shot her a withering glare that sent her stumbling back a step. "Are you the captain of this aircraft, Miss Jenkins? Or am I? I will not be questioned on my own flight deck or the jet bridge leading to it." He turned his full attention back to Julian. "I'm not comfortable with you on this flight. I'm denying you boarding." The words hung in the air, stark and unbelievable. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Denied boarding. Not for being drunk or disruptive or a security risk, but for the unspoken, unarticulated reason hanging poisonously in the air. Julian felt a surge of white-hot anger, an emotion he rarely allowed himself to indulge. He thought of the endless nights, the sacrifices, the sheer force of will it had taken to get to this point, only to be blocked by the petty tyranny of one man on a power trip. "On what grounds?" Julian demanded, his voice dangerously low. "State the specific regulation you are invoking, Captain." "On the grounds of captain's discretion," Morrison snapped back, his face reddening. He was a man who expected compliance, not legal debate. "I don't need to explain my decisions to you. You are a potential security risk. You are not boarding Flight 114. He thrust the passport and boarding pass into Sarah's hands. "Find him another flight. Tomorrow." With that, he turned his back on Julian, a gesture of ultimate dismissal, and strode down the jet bridge. "Let's get the rest of these people on board. We have a schedule to keep." Julian stood frozen for a moment, the muffled sounds of the airport fading into a dull roar in his ears. He was looking at the back of the man who had, in the space of 3 minutes, taken a sledgehammer to the most important moment of his professional life. The other passengers, a mix of embarrassed, confused, and a few overtly hostile faces, were now being ushered past him. They wouldn't meet his eye. It was as if he had become invisible. He was no longer Julian Vance, CEO of Aurasin. He was just a problem, a delay, a black man who had been put back in his place by a man in a uniform. The door to the aircraft and to Zurich was closing. The hum of the jet bridge PA system crackled to life. "Final boarding call for Stellara Air Flight 114 to Zurich." The words were a cruel joke. Julian's mind, usually a seamless engine of logic and strategy, was a maelstrom of fury and disbelief. He pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. His first call was to Stellara Air's elite customer service line, a private number for their most valuable clients. The response was a polite, infuriatingly calm litany of corporate speak. "We understand your frustration, Mr. Vance, but the captain has final authority on all matters of safety and security." "This wasn't about safety," Julian cut in, his voice tight. "This was about the color of my skin." "We can't comment on that, sir. We can rebook you on the next available flight." "The next flight arrives tomorrow at 3 p.m. Zurich time," Julian said, the logistical map already forming in his head. "My meeting is at 9 a.m. That won't work." He hung up, the futility of the conversation galling. He was trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare designed to protect the airline, not the passenger. His next call was to Arthur. "Arthur," he began, the rage in his voice barely contained. "We have a problem, a big one." He explained the situation, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. On the other end of the line, Arthur Kensington's calm demeanor shattered. "He did what?" "On what grounds?" "The grounds of, I'm the captain, and I don't like the look of you," Julian said bitterly. "It was blatant, Arthur. There was no ambiguity." "My God, okay, stay calm." Arthur's mind was already racing, calculating the fallout. "Let me call our legal team. Let me call Stellara's CEO, James Macmillan. I know him personally. We'll get this sorted out. Is the plane still there?" Julian looked through the window. As if on cue, the jet bridge began to retract from the aircraft with a hydraulic hiss. The ground crew were making their final checks. The lights of the Airbus A350 blinked, serene and indifferent. "No, Arthur," Julian said, a feeling of profound helplessness washing over him. "It's getting ready to push back. It's gone." Inside the cockpit of Flight 114, Captain Robert Morrison was completing his pre-flight checklist. His first officer, a younger man named James Hayes, shot him a sideways glance. "That was intense back there, Captain," Hayes said carefully. "Just doing my job, James," Morrison grunted, not looking up from his instruments. "You get a feel for these things. Guy comes in, flashy suit, talking about billion-dollar deals. It's a classic pressure tactic, trying to intimidate you. I saw it a dozen times in the Air Force. You let one thing slide, and you compromise the entire flight." "He's one of our highest-tier flyers, though," Hayes pressed, clearly uncomfortable. "The company is going to hear about this." "Let them," Morrison said with a dismissive wave. "I'd rather fill out 100 pages of paperwork for being cautious than 1 page for being careless. I made the command decision. It's done. Now let's get this bird in the air." Hayes fell silent, but he couldn't shake the image of Julian Vance's face, the shock, the controlled anger. It hadn't looked like the face of a security threat. It had looked like the face of a man who had been profoundly wronged. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Julian watched it taxi toward the runway. Each foot it moved was another nail in the coffin of the Kronos deal. His phone buzzed again. It was his chief operating officer, Maria. "Julian, what's going on? Arthur called me. He sounded frantic. Are you not on the flight?" "I'm not, Maria. The pilot refused me boarding." He could hear her sharp intake of breath. "You're kidding. Why?" "You can probably guess why." A heavy silence followed. Maria knew Julian's history. She had seen the subtle and not-so-subtle slights he had endured for years. "Okay," she said, her voice shifting into crisis mode. "Plan B. Can we charter a private jet?" "I'm already on it," Julian said, his fingers flying on his tablet, searching for charter services at Teterboro. "But even a Gulfstream G650 can't bend the laws of physics. Best-case scenario, we're wheels up in 3 hours. That still puts me in Zurich after noon. The meeting will be over." The Kronos deal was structured with razor-thin margins for error. Klaus Richter was a man who valued symbolism as much as substance. A CEO who couldn't even make it to the final signing was not a man he would entrust with the future of his family's legacy. This failure wasn't just a logistical hiccup. It was a catastrophic failure of leadership in Richter's eyes. As Flight 114 ascended into the darkening sky, a tiny pinprick of light disappearing into the vastness, Julian Vance stood at the window of a soulless airport terminal, feeling the $9 billion deal, his life's work, slipping through his fingers. The storm had broken, and he was at its epicenter. The only question now was how much damage it would do. The Dolder Grand Hotel in Zurich, perched on a hill overlooking the lake, is a monument to old-world European luxury. In one of its most opulent conference rooms, a palpable tension was beginning to curdle the air of corporate decorum. Arthur Kensington stood by the panoramic window, his phone pressed tightly to his ear, his face a grim mask. Across the polished mahogany table, the delegation from Kronos Dynamics sat with rigid posture, their polite smiles beginning to wear thin. At the head of the table was Klaus Richter, a man in his late 60s with piercing blue eyes and an air of aristocratic impatience. He glanced at his Patek Philippe watch, a deliberate, theatrical gesture. It was 8:45 a.m. The signing was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp. "Arthur?" Richter said, his German-accented English as precise as a scalpel. "Is there a problem with Mr. Vance's arrival?" Arthur lowered his phone. He had just gotten off the line with Julian, who was now somewhere over the Atlantic in a hastily chartered jet, a futile, desperate race against time. "My sincerest apologies, Klaus," Arthur began, choosing his words with diplomatic care. "There has been an unforeseen travel disruption, a serious issue with the airline. Julian is en route, but he will be delayed." Richter's eyebrows, thin and white, rose a fraction of an inch. "Delayed?" The word sounded like an obscenity in his mouth. "The signing is in 15 minutes. We have bankers, lawyers, and the press waiting. This is not a casual coffee meeting. This is the culmination of 6 months of rigorous negotiation." "I understand that completely," Arthur said, trying to project a calm he did not feel. This was a situation entirely beyond his control. An abuse of authority by the flight captain, in fact. We are already preparing a formal action against Stellara Air. But Richter wasn't interested in excuses or finger-pointing. He saw the world in black and white, results and failures. A leader, in his view, controlled his circumstances. He did not become a victim of them. An inability to manage one's travel to the most important meeting of his career does not inspire confidence, Arthur, Richter said coldly. He stood up, a clear signal that the conversation was over. "We will postpone the signing for 24 hours. If Mr. Vance is in this room, at this table, tomorrow at 9:00 a.m., we will proceed. If not, Kronos Dynamics will be officially withdrawing its offer. We do not partner with organizations that cannot master basic logistics." He and his team filed out of the room, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. The champagne remained on ice. The pens lay untouched next to the pristine signature pages. Arthur immediately called the Oracin board members who were gathered in an adjacent suite. The news hit them like a physical blow. "He's giving us 24 hours?" one director asked, aghast. "It's a test," another muttered. "A power play. He's seeing how Julian responds under pressure." But it was more than that. News of this nature doesn't stay contained in a Zurich hotel room. A junior analyst from one of the investment banks involved texted a friend. That friend told a colleague. Within an hour, whispers began to circulate through the financial chat rooms of London and New York. Oracin Hao Kronos signing delayed. Vance a no-show in Zurich. Rumors of a problem with the deal. In the world of high-stakes finance, a rumor is as good as a fact. Oracin's stock, which had been soaring in anticipation of the merger, began to show signs of weakness in pre-market trading. The ticker symbol, ASIN, which had been a sea of green for weeks, suddenly blinked red. It was a small dip at first, less than 1%, a minor tremor. But the experienced traders knew what it signified. It was the whisper of an avalanche. Aboard the chartered Gulfstream, Julian was helpless. He had Wi-Fi, but it was patchy over the mid-Atlantic. He saw the pre-market dip. He saw the frantic emails from his PR team. He was in a gilded cage, flying at 50,000 feet, completely powerless to stop the fire that was starting to catch below. The irony was crushing. His entire empire was built on the mastery of logistics, on guaranteeing that packages and freight arrived exactly when they were supposed to. Yet he himself had failed to be delivered to his destination. Meanwhile, somewhere over Newfoundland, Captain Robert Morrison was enjoying a cup of coffee. The flight was smooth, the passengers quiet. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had trusted his gut, asserted his authority, and kept his plane safe. He had done a good job. He imagined the man he'd kicked off the flight was probably some low-level scammer who had gotten his hands on a fraudulent ticket. He'd never have to think about him again. He was blissfully unaware that his command decision had just lit the fuse on a $9 billion bomb, and the shockwaves were already beginning to shake the foundations of 2 global companies. The tremors were small for now, but Arthur Kensington knew what was coming. The market is a beast that feeds on certainty and panics at the unknown. A 24-hour delay was a lifetime. If Julian didn't make it, if the deal collapsed, it wouldn't be a dip, it would be a bloodbath, and it would all be because one man couldn't see a CEO and saw only a threat. Julian landed in Zurich at 1:30 p.m., looking exhausted but still radiating a focused intensity. He was met on the tarmac not by a celebratory delegation, but by a somber Arthur Kensington. There was no time for apologies or commiseration. They were in damage control mode. "Richter won't take my calls," Arthur said as they sped towards the city. "He's gone dark. He's letting us stew." "It's a power move," Julian stated, his jaw tight. "He wants to see us bleed a little. He wants to see if we're tough enough to survive a hit." But the hit was harder than either of them could have imagined. As the European markets closed and the US markets opened, the whispers had become a roar. The official story from Aura Sin's PR team was a minor logistical delay, but no one was buying it. The stock, Asin, opened down 7%. Then it slid to 12%. By midday, it was in a 20% freefall. Automated trading algorithms, programmed to sell on signs of instability, kicked in, accelerating the descent. Panic selling began among retail investors. Every major financial news network, Bloomberg, CNBC, Fox Business, was leading with the story. Crisis in Zurich, Aura Sin's $9 billion merger in jeopardy, as CEO Julian Vance fails to appear for signing. The stock ticker was a waterfall of red. For every point it dropped, hundreds of millions of dollars in shareholder value were evaporating into thin air. A company that had been the darling of Wall Street just 24 hours earlier was now being treated like a toxic asset. The panic was infectious. It even began to affect Kronos Dynamics' stock, which dipped 5% as investors worried that the German giant was trying to merge with a house of cards. Inside the Aura Sin boardroom, an emergency video conference was underway. The directors' faces were pale, their voices strained. They were watching a virtual bonfire of their fortunes. "This is a catastrophe," yelled one director, a hedge fund manager named Bill Hayes. "We've lost over $2 billion in market cap in 3 hours. What in God's name happened?" Julian, looking straight into the camera from his Zurich hotel suite, held up a hand. "What happened is that I was the victim of a racist act that barred me from a flight. What's happening now is a market overreaction, fueled by speculation." "Racist act? What are you talking about?" Julian recounted the incident with Captain Morrison in cold, precise detail. The board was silent, stunned. They had dealt with market fluctuations, hostile takeovers, and software bugs. They had never factored a 1950s-era civil rights violation into their risk assessments. "My God," one director breathed. "The airline did that?" "Stellara Air is about to have the biggest lawsuit in its history on its hands," Julian said, his voice like ice. "But that doesn't help us right now. Our only move is to project strength. We wait for the meeting tomorrow, I sign the deal, and we stop the bleeding." But Klaus Richter had other plans. He was watching the financial news from his office, a grim satisfaction on his face. He saw not a logistical hiccup, but a fundamental weakness. A company whose stock could be so easily battered, whose leader could be so easily neutralized, was not the rock-solid partner he sought. At 4:01 p.m. New York time, just as the market closed, the official press release dropped. It was a single devastating sentence. Kronos Dynamics has officially withdrawn its acquisition offer for Aura Sin, citing concerns over leadership stability and unforeseen market volatility. The bomb had detonated. The deal was dead. The news hit the wire and all hell broke loose. In after-hours trading, Orasyn's stock went off a cliff. It plunged another 30%. In the space of a single business day, the company had lost nearly half its value. Billions of dollars. Gone. It was a corporate cataclysm. In his Zurich hotel room, Julian Vance watched the numbers fall. It felt unreal. Years of work, of innovation, of building something from nothing, decimated because of one man's bigotry. But just as despair began to set in, his phone rang. It was his head of PR, a sharp woman named Jessica. "Julian," she said, her voice unusually excited. "We might have something. A passenger at the gate next to yours filmed it. The whole confrontation with the pilot. They sent it to a journalist." Julian sat bolt upright. "Do we have the video?" "We do," Jessica said. It's crystal clear. Every word. It's undeniable." "Julian, the story is about to change. It's not going to be Orasyn CEO Mrs. Meeting. It's going to be Stellara Air Pilots racist tirade scuttles billion-dollar merger." A new strategy began to form in Julian's mind, rising from the ashes of the Kronos deal. The market had punished him for a perceived failure of logistics. Now, he was about to show them the real story. The narrative was about to be weaponized. The panic on Wall Street was nothing compared to the panic that was about to hit the executive suites of Stellara Air. The video dropped at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. It was uploaded by a prominent investigative journalist on X, formerly Twitter, with the caption, "Exclusive. The real reason a $9 billion deal died today. I have verified this footage of Stellara Air, Captain Robert Morrison, denying boarding to Orasyn CEO Julian Vance." The video was raw, shaky, and utterly damning. It captured the entire exchange. Morrison's sneering tone, his dismissive hand gesture, his flimsy justifications, and his final authoritarian declaration. It captured Julian's calm, his professionalism, and his quiet, simmering fury. The audio was clear. "You don't look like a Julian. I'm not comfortable with you on this flight. I have final say." Within an hour, it had 10 million views. By morning, it would have 100 million. It was the lead story on every news channel, every website, every newspaper. The hashtag #LawWhileFlyingWhileBlack was trending globally. The entire narrative had been flipped on its head. Julian Vance was no longer the CEO who fumbled a deal. He was the victim of a shocking act of corporate racism. Orasyn was no longer a volatile stock. It was a sympathetic party in a massive corporate scandal. And Stellara Air was now in the crosshairs. The phone of James Macmillan, Stellara's CEO, began to ring and did not stop. It was his board, his investors, his PR team, and the media. His company was suddenly the villain in a global news story. Their stock, SA, was a different story. In pre-market trading, it wasn't just dipping, it was plummeting. An immediate 25% drop, with no bottom in sight. The shareholders of Stellara Air were in absolute panic. These weren't just tech investors used to volatility. These were pension funds, retirement accounts, and everyday people who had bought into the airline's blue-chip image of reliability and prestige. They were watching their life savings get torched. An emergency board meeting was convened at Stellara headquarters. The atmosphere was a mixture of sheer terror and incandescent rage. "How did we let this happen?" one board member shouted. "Who the hell is Robert Morrison?" A frantic background check revealed Morrison was a 30-year veteran, ex-Air Force, with a spotless flight record, but a history of minor, attitudinal complaints from junior staff that had been consistently dismissed by his superiors. He was part of the old guard. Untouchable. Until now. "He's been suspended pending a full investigation," Macmillan said, his voice strained. "Suspended?" another director shrieked. "He should be fired. He should be in jail. He just cost this company its reputation and billions of dollars in market value." Orasin's lawyers have already filed a preliminary notice of lawsuit. They're not suing for damages for a missed meeting. They're suing for tortious interference and gross negligence, leading to the collapse of the Kronos merger. Their opening demand is for $5 billion. The room fell silent. $5 billion. It was a figure that could bankrupt them. The panic wasn't just on the board. It was everywhere. Corporate accounts, their most lucrative customers, began calling to suspend their contracts. Celebrities and politicians who had endorsement deals with Stellara were publicly severing ties. The brand was becoming radioactive in real time. Meanwhile, a very different conversation was happening among the Orasin shareholders. Julian and Arthur had been on the phone with their major investors all morning. The message was clear. "The Kronos deal is dead," Julian told them, his voice firm and confident. "And that's a good thing. We are not the weak party here. We were the target of a gross injustice, and we are now in a position of immense moral and legal strength. Forget Kronos. Our focus now is on Stellara Air. They are going to make us whole, and the world is now watching us. Our brand recognition has gone through the roof. We are no longer just a logistics company. We are now at the center of a global conversation about diversity and inclusion in corporate America. We will weather this. We will win this lawsuit, and we will emerge stronger than ever." His words, combined with the massive public support swinging in his favor, had a powerful effect. The panic selling of ASIN stopped. The stock stabilized. It was still down, but it had found its floor. Some savvy investors even started buying, sensing a massive rebound on the horizon. The real ending that made shareholders panic wasn't the collapse of Orasin. The twist was that the target of the panic had shifted entirely. The shareholders of Stellara Air were the ones in a death spiral, watching a fire they didn't start burn their house down. And the man who lit the match was just about to land in New York, completely oblivious to the world he had set ablaze. Captain Robert Morrison guided Flight 115, the return from Zurich, to a smooth landing at JFK. It had been another textbook flight. He felt the familiar sense of pride as the wheels kissed the runway. He had done his duty. He had flown his passengers safely across an ocean. He was in command. As he taxied to the gate, he followed standard procedure, keeping his phone off until the engines were spooled down. He was thinking about getting home, having a cold beer, and watching the game. He had completely forgotten about the incident with the passenger 2 days ago. It was a minor blip, a non-event. Once the plane was secured at the gate, he finally switched on his phone. It exploded. A deluge of notifications, hundreds of them, flooded his screen. Voicemails, text messages, news alerts. His wife, his brother, his union rep. His eyes struggled to make sense of the fragmented headlines. Stellara Air pilot in racism scandal. Video of Captain Robert Morrison. SA stock plummets after. CEO Julian Vance. His blood ran cold. He tapped on a news link, and his own face stared back at him from the screen, a grainy still from the viral video. He watched it, his hands trembling. He heard his own voice, arrogant and dismissive. He saw the face of the man he had barred from the flight, calm and dignified. Julian Vance, CEO of Orasin. It was all real. The $9 billion deal. All of it. A knock on the cockpit door jolted him. It was the head of JFK ground operations, flanked by 2 security guards. "Captain Morrison," the man said, his face grim. "You're to come with us. You've been suspended. The FAA has already opened an investigation." Morrison stumbled out of the cockpit in a daze. The flight attendants, who had once looked at him with respect, now stared with a mixture of pity and contempt. He was escorted through the back corridors of the airport, stripped of his credentials, and unceremoniously deposited on the curb like a piece of lost luggage. The authority he had cherished his entire life had been stripped away in an instant. But the real karma, the hard, personal karma, was just beginning. When he finally got home, his wife, Carol, was waiting for him, her face stained with tears. "Our son was sent home from school, Bob. He got into a fight because someone called his dad a racist pig. Our address is all over the internet. We're getting death threats." Morrison sank into a chair, his world crumbling. I was just being cautious. I was following my training." "You were being a bigot," she screamed. "I've seen the way you look at people, Bob. I've heard your comments. I just never thought you'd be stupid enough to do it at work." The next day, he was officially fired. His union, under immense public pressure, issued a statement condemning his actions and refused to represent him. The FAA permanently revoked his pilot's license. But the most devastating blow came from a call from his financial advisor. "Bob, we need to talk," the advisor, a man named Gary, said, his voice grave. "About your portfolio." Robert Morrison was a conservative man in all aspects of his life, including his finances. He didn't play the market. For 30 years, he had diligently put his money, his entire retirement savings, his 401k, and his pension payout into what he considered the safest possible investment, his own company. He owned tens of thousands of shares of Stellara Air. It was his nest egg, his pride, the reward for a lifetime of service. "The stock, Bob," Gary began. "SA is down 68% since Monday. It's in total freefall. The lawsuits are just beginning." Morrison felt a wave of nausea. He pulled up the stock ticker on his computer. He watched the glowing red letters. "SA." The number kept ticking down. 20, 18, 15 hours. Every drop represented a piece of his future dissolving. His house, his boat, his comfortable retirement. He had caused this. His own actions, born from a moment of petty prejudice, had systematically dismantled his own life savings. He had panicked the shareholders, and in doing so, he had panicked himself into ruin. The very company he claimed to be protecting, he had mortally wounded, and it was now bleeding him dry. Weeks later, he saw Julian Vance on the news. Vance was announcing a new initiative, funded by an enormous settlement from Stellara Air, to support minority-owned tech startups. He looked stronger, more powerful than ever. He had turned the worst moment of his professional life into a platform for positive change. He had not only weathered the storm, he had learned to command it. Robert Morrison, by contrast, was a broken man. He had lost his job, his reputation, his family. His wife eventually left him, and his fortune. He was a pariah. He eventually took a job driving a delivery truck for a local hardware store, a man who once commanded the skies, now grounded in every sense of the word, forever haunted by the memory of a closing aircraft door and the devastating, personal karma of the ticker tape. 3 weeks after the video detonated, the corporate landscape had been fundamentally reshaped. Oracin, far from being crippled, was thriving. The stock, ASIN, had not only clawed back its losses, but had surged 15% past its pre-incident high. The company was now a household name, a symbol of resilience and righteous defiance. Julian Vance found his face on the cover of Time magazine, not as a tech mogul, but under the headline, "The New Face of Corporate Justice." He had become a reluctant icon, a focal point for a global conversation that extended far beyond logistics algorithms. He hated it. Seated in his minimalist corner office overlooking the San Francisco Bay, He swiped through a dozen articles about himself. They lauded his grace under fire and his quiet dignity. They barely mentioned the intricate predictive models or the revolutionary blockchain integration that were the true heart of his life's work. His success was being reframed, his identity as an innovator overshadowed by his identity as a victim. Arthur Kensington walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee. He sensed Julian's dark mood immediately. "The court of public opinion can be a fickle beast," Arthur said, placing a cup on the desk. "It's not the court I'm worried about, Arthur," Julian replied, gesturing to the tablet. "This isn't me. I built Aurisin to win on merit, on performance. We were supposed to conquer the world because our tech was better, because we were smarter and faster. Now we're a cause. People are investing in us out of sympathy. Don't ever mistake a strategic advantage for a weakness, Julian," Arthur countered, his tone firm. "Power isn't just about what you build, it's about the narrative you command. You didn't ask for this narrative, but you command it nonetheless. The question is, what are you going to do with it?" As if on cue, Julian's private phone, the one reserved for his most sensitive contacts, buzzed with an encrypted message from an unknown number. The text was brief and direct. "Mr. Vance, my name is Marcus Thorne. I represent the largest institutional shareholder in Stellara Air. I am with their CEO, James Macmillan. We request an urgent, off-the-record meeting. Your venue, your time. No lawyers. We believe a legal battle will destroy what's left of our company and will not serve your ultimate interests. There is another path. Please consider it." Julian showed the message to Arthur, whose eyebrows shot up. Marcus Thorne. The name carried immense weight. Thorne was the founder of Trident Capital, a private equity firm famous for its ruthless, often brilliant, corporate restructuring. He wasn't a sentimentalist. He was a kingmaker and a butcher, depending on what a company needed. If Thorne was involved, this was no longer about a simple apology. "No lawyers," Julian mused. "He's cutting through the noise. He knows our legal case is airtight. This is something else." "This is a predator who smells blood in the water," Arthur warned. "His own blood, for once. He's trapped, and a trapped predator is the most dangerous kind." "Let's see what he wants," Julian said, a spark of his old strategic fire returning to his eyes. He typed a reply. "The Atherton Hotel, private suite. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. The suite at the Atherton was a study in beige neutrality. Julian and Arthur sat on one side of a large coffee table. James Macmillan and Marcus Thorne sat on the other. Macmillan, Stellara's CEO, looked like a ghost. He was pale, exhausted, and visibly humbled. Marcus Thorne, in contrast, was a picture of coiled energy. He was impeccably dressed, his eyes sharp and analytical, missing nothing. He was the one who spoke. "Mr. Vance, thank you for meeting us," Thorne began, his voice calm and devoid of emotion. "Let's dispense with the performative apologies. What happened to you was appalling. It was a failure of our culture, our systems, and our leadership. James here has already tendered his resignation, which I have, for the moment, refused to accept." Macmillan flinched but said nothing. "The situation is simple," Thorne continued, leaning forward. "Stellara Air is on the verge of collapse. Our brand is toxic. We are losing $50 million a day in corporate and premium bookings. We are facing dozens of class action lawsuits and a federal investigation. Your lawsuit, which your lawyers rightly value in the billions, would trigger our bankruptcy clauses. The company would be broken up and sold for parts. The vultures, some of whom are my best friends, are already circling." Julian remained silent, his face unreadable. He let the man talk. "A settlement, even a massive one, won't save us," Thorne said, getting to the heart of the matter. Paying you $5 billion doesn't convince a single businesswoman in Chicago to book a flight with us. It doesn't restore the faith of the pension funds that hold our stock. It's just blood money. It doesn't fix the disease. He paused, his eyes locking onto Julian's. We are not here to offer you money, Mr. Vance. We are here to offer you the company. Arthur Kensington shifted in his seat. Julian's expression didn't change, but a flicker of surprise registered deep in his eyes. Here is the offer. Thorne laid it out, piece by piece. First, we drop the pretense of a cash settlement. Instead, Stellara Air will transfer a 20% equity stake in the airline directly to Oracin. Overnight, you become our single largest shareholder. Your victory isn't paid for in dollars, it's paid for in ownership. Second, he went on, we will immediately expand the board of directors by 2 seats. You, Mr. Vance, will personally take one of them. The second will be filled by any qualified individual of your choosing, with a mandate for ethical oversight. Third, and most importantly, the board will vote to create a new, permanent committee, the Modernization and Cultural Oversight Committee. You will be its chairman. This committee will have unprecedented power, final say on hiring and training standards for all 80,000 employees, veto power over marketing campaigns, and a direct line to every department, from the cockpit to the call centers. You would have the authority to tear down the old culture and rebuild it from the ground up. The sheer audacity of the offer filled the room. It was a masterstroke of corporate jiu-jitsu. Thorne wasn't trying to fight Julian. He was trying to make Julian the face of Stellara's salvation. He wanted to chain Julian's pristine reputation to his own sinking ship, hoping it would make the vessel float again. You want to put your greatest critic in charge of the rebuild, Julian stated, finally speaking. You want me to be your shield. I want to put the man who represents everything we failed to be at the very center of our identity. Thorne corrected him smoothly. It's the only authentic way forward. We can't tell the world we've changed. We have to show them. You on our board, in our press conferences, redesigning our company. That is a message of change nobody can ignore. It is our only path to survival. Julian leaned back, the gears in his mind turning at incredible speed. The anger he felt towards the airline was still there, a hot coal in his gut. His first instinct was to refuse, to let them burn for what they did. But his pragmatism, the quality that had made him a billionaire, saw the angles. Taking the money was revenge, taking control. That was true power. It was the power to ensure that a Captain Morrison could never exist in that company again. It was a monumental, thankless, and politically fraught task. It could also tarnish Oracin by association, but it was also a chance to turn his symbolic victory into a tangible, systemic revolution. He looked at Arthur, who was watching him intently. He then turned his gaze back to the 2 desperate men across from him. His decision wouldn't just be about business, it would be about his legacy. Would he be the man who cashed the check, or the man who took the throne? The silence stretched, thick with the weight of an empire hanging in the balance. The story of Julian Vance and Robert Morrison is a stark reminder that in our hyper-connected world, the consequences of our actions can be both immediate and catastrophic. A single act of prejudice, once a private poison, can now trigger a global firestorm, wiping out billions in value and destroying lives. It shows that the old boys club, the quiet nod and wink of discrimination, is no match for the power of a smartphone camera and a public that demands accountability. Robert Morrison didn't just lose his job. His own bigotry boomeranged, erasing his entire life's work. It's a powerful lesson that karma isn't just a spiritual concept. Sometimes you can watch it unfold in real time on the stock market ticker. If this story shocked you and made you think, please hit that like button to help us share it with more people. Consider subscribing and turning on notifications for more true life stories where karma delivers its verdict in the most unexpected and dramatic ways. And we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think the consequences fit the action? Your engagement helps our community grow. Thank you for listening.